we are probably witnessing one of the most profound platform shifts that we'll have ever experienced in human history. And so every job will get reconfigured, every workflow is going to change within, and the way in which we live our lives are going to be very different, right? So then you say, okay, if that's the case, what are the things that might hold it back, right? Because what ends up happening is in the short term, most people grossly overestimate the impact of these technologies, but in the long term, they tend to massively underestimate the impact that these technologies have. So you start thinking about this and going, what are the constraints? And we think there are three major constraints. The first constraint is you just don't have enough infrastructure. There's not enough power, compute, and network bandwidth in the world to fulfill the needs of AI. It's massively, in scarcity right now. So that's the first constraint. The second big constraint is there's a trust gap. And what I mean by the trust gap is if you can't trust these systems, you're not going to use them. And so security and safety become prerequisites for the adoption of these systems, right? And then the third area is what we call a data gap, where right now, so far, these AI models have been trained on human-generated data that's publicly available on the internet. And that'll continue, but we're starting to run out of human-generated data being publicly available on the internet. So what people are doing is, the way that these models are evolving to keep the scaling laws going is you have synthetic data, and then you'll also have machine data, which will be a very, very prominent area, because as agents get more and more prolific, you'll have the agents will generate logs of activity that'll go into machine data. And so you'll have a lot of time series data that you need to make sure that you factor in and merge that with human generated data so you can have additional insights that come out. And so those are the three big constraints: infrastructure, trust, and data. And then you say, all right, so if those are the constraints, what can be done to go out and overcome those constraints? And that's where you're starting to see all of the opportunity, huge amount of investments that are being made. Like if you think about data centers right now, you're not bringing power to the data centers. You're building data centers where the power is. You're trying to make sure that every country has a need for token generation, because your ability to generate tokens will be directly proportionate to your ability to have economic prosperity as well as, kind of protect your national security. And so these tend to be profound implications that need to be thought through. And CISCO is at the center of it all because we provide networking, compute, and connectivity infrastructure for AI data centers. We also provide safety and security, not just for cyber defense, but also for securing AI itself. And then thirdly, we have a platform that we had acquired called Splunk, which is one of the world's leaders in machine-generated data and being able to make sure that you can use time series data to be correlated with human-generated data so you can get better insights. So in each one of those areas, we've got billions of dollars of investments. We're really looking forward to making sure that we can actually progress the cause for AI.
You talk about power infrastructure. So one big thing about data centers is obviously they are like the new BMWs and Mercedes of AI, of computing world. They are the power guzzlers like that. So, and again, when we talk about climate and also, so some people are talking, can we feed all these power centers, data centers with renewables? And as you said, where the data centers are being built where power is already there.
Yeah.
So can we use solar or wind? And especially India, I think, offers a lot of opportunity for that, creating more solar, more wind.
Yeah, I think you'll start to see, green data center build-outs that are very, very prominent. I think the other area that we haven't really talked that much about in data centers that'll, over the course of the next few years, get really prominent is what happens with space data centers. Because if you think about what the constraints are right now, when you think of data centers, all the cooling that's required for the data centers, 90% of the weight in a rack tends to be the cooling infrastructure. It's not the compute, it's the cooling that actually causes it is a huge amount of the weight. When you go into space, you've got solar, and the intensity of solar is much higher than what you have on Earth. And so the cooling can tend to be at a very different level of economic proportion than what you get over here. And then the energy availability is much higher too. So I think there's space data centers that are also being built out at the same time. So I think there's going to be innovation across a multitude of different directions on efficiency of power to power the data centers, on making sure that you've got cooling apparatus done in the right way, to make sure that you've got the right level of connectivity of the data center so you can do it where the power is available. For example, one of the areas that we've done a lot of innovation is not just, the way that data centers worked is you had these GPUs and the models would sit on a GPU and then get trained. As the models got bigger, they didn't sit on a single GPU. They then needed to sit on multiple GPUs that were networked together. So you actually created a server with multiple GPUs. But then the models got bigger than what could sit on a single server. So then you had a series of servers that actually got tied together in a rack. And so you had the entire rack networked. But that got to be not sufficient either because the models kept getting bigger. So now instead of a rack, you have multiple racks within a data center that you started networking together. And now you're at the point where even that is not sufficient. And so what are we doing? We're actually taking data centers that might be hundreds of kilometers apart and creating an ultra cluster with them so that there's coherent clusters across data centers that might be hundreds of kilometers apart that can be networked together where the latency is still low enough that it operates like a coherent cluster. And that's where, Cisco has built specialized network ASIC chips so that you can have technologies like deep buffering for long range, kind of communication. You've got optics, all of these kind of capabilities that you need to have to make sure that you can actually overcome the constraints of power and overcome the constraints that are needed so that you can deliver the right level of infrastructure, apparatus for AI needs. And this is only going to compound because as agents get to be working 7/24, on average, you'll have maybe 10 to 100 agents per human. If you have 8 billion humans on the planet, you might have between 80 and 800 billion agents. And they're all going to be working 7/24. So imagine the level of kind of infrastructure requirements that are going to be needed. It's going to be non-trivial.
So how far or close we are to these space data centers?
They're actually starting to get built out right now. And so the thing that's really interesting about this market is how quickly the entire industry seems to continue to keep moving. And it's moving fast across multitude of different directions and dimensions. So I feel like, one of the things that you'll find hard is in a few years, maybe in 2 years or 3 years, it'll be impossible to predict long term because it's not because your ability changed. It's because the compression of innovation is so much that now what used to happen in 10 years is now happening within 6 months. And so it gets very hard to predict what happens, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years out, because that's like the compounding effect of that is pretty profound.
And AI is, I think, a big incident.
AI is the input that makes the velocity change.
16 years to 5-6 months.
That's right. It's all because of the automation that happens because of, like, what are we doing right now? Up until now, humans have felt like, knowledge was the primary, kind of differentiator, right? Like we took pride in knowing something. We have now tokenized intelligence. And so intelligence becomes a commodity. Everyone will have it. And so the differentiation is going to be in how do you actually ask the right questions, and are you able to creatively use these models where your questions are unique, but the questions are going to be far more important than the answer it gives, because the knowledge itself is going to get pretty commoditized and intelligence is going to be widely available.
So that is where human intelligence will have a role.
That's exactly right.
And coming back to space, so do we see corporates or countries fighting for the space for data centers in space?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you see companies, all the major hyperscalers are actually starting to see how they're going to start building out, kind of presence in space. So I think that'll happen. I mean, it's not something that is imminent where within 6 months you'll see majority of the workload go into space. But I think that over time, what you'll see is anywhere where there's availability of abundance of power, data centers will get built out. And there is abundance of solar energy in space at a much higher intensity than what you would find on Earth. And so it just seems like it would make logical sense to make sure you build out data centers in space. And by the way, there's complexities over there, and how do you make sure that you dissipate cooling, and how does cooling work in a vacuum, and all of those pieces that need to get solved for. But in general, that happens to be one big dimension of development. The other big dimension of development is data centers are going to get diffused across the entire world, where every country is going to want to have an ability to generate tokens. And their ability to generate tokens will be directly proportionate to their economic prosperity as well as national security. And so you're going to start to see every country have an interest in token generation ability. And so every country is going to have their sovereign national interest to go out and pursue. And so they will want to build their own data centers. And so we want to make sure that any country that wants to provide and have token generation ability, we can provide them the underlying infrastructure to make that happen.
Talking about security, obviously, because AI is playing a big role there. But at the same time, bad actors are also using AI only. So
That's right.
How do we stay a step or two steps ahead?
That's a great question. So the reality is the adversaries right now have access to the same tools that we do, right? And so attacks are going to start happening far more at a pace that is going to be very difficult to keep up with at human scale. So your countermeasures for an attack, your defensive measures, have to be at machine scale. It can no longer be limited only to human scale. And so the first thing you have to do is, if you don't use AI for your cyber defenses, you will just get outsmarted by the attacks, because you won't be able to, at human scale, you won't be able to go out and kind of catch them, right? And then the second thing you have to do is not just worry about cyber defense, but think about securing AI itself. Because these AI models, what is the core characteristic of these models? They tend to be non-deterministic. That means they're very unpredictable, right? So if you ask it a question, you don't always get the same answer every single time. It's slightly varying. But you're building these very predictable, deterministic applications in the enterprise. If I have a financial services workflow, or if I have a pharmaceutical workflow, I can't keep having different responses every single time I trigger a workflow. You have to do it exactly the same way. If you're doing cybersecurity, you want to make sure that you have a predictable response, not something that hallucinates. Hallucination is a feature when you're writing poetry. It's a bug when you're thinking about building deterministic applications, right? And so we need to make sure that we actually tie these pieces together in a way where on safety and security, you don't just use AI in cyber defense, but you use these technologies to secure AI itself. So these models have guardrails where they don't just act unpredictably with the question that's asked. It actually gives you predictable behavior, even though the model has a core characteristic of being non-deterministic. And that's what these safety and security systems do. And like, we have a product at CISCO called AI Defense. And AI Defense does exactly that, where it can validate a model, make sure that if a model is tricked to ask a certain question, it doesn't get tricked. And then it puts runtime enforcement guardrails around the model. And that's a very important dynamic of how you can secure AI itself, rather than just using AI for cyber defense.
Lastly, I will put two questions together. Across computing, networking, AI and all, how do you see CISCO going ahead, working more in India? And also next month, we are having Global AI Summit, so we would be participating in that. So how you see India going ahead in that space of AI?
Yeah. So look, India is a very strategic, region for us. We, outside of the US, we've got the largest concentration of people in India. We've had a tremendous amount of growth that we've experienced over there as well. And we continue to make sure that we actually are moving our manufacturing, in some cases, to India as well. So for example, we have a full node developed for manufacturing in Chennai. that we launched about a year ago. And so I think that India is a very strategic part of the world for us, and we want to continue to keep investing in India. And I think there's a very strong public-private partnership culture over there. We've actually been very fortunate to work with the administration over there, and our goal is to continue to keep serving the best technologies that America produces to India so that they can have the best ability for generating tokens for AI. And we work with a multitude of different industries in India, and we will continue to do that. It's one of our, most strategic regions as we move forward. So I personally am the country sponsor. I come there quite frequently, and I'll be there for the AI Summit. And I'm glad that the AI Summit's happening over there as well. And I feel like the long-term prosperity of India will very much depend on continued use of AI. And so we're very, very encouraged to make sure that we can support both the government as well as the private sector as much as we can from our side.